Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome Brian Stelter to our series and welcome back Judd Apatow, who has previously interviewed Roger Daltrey and Mark Seliger at Live Talks Los Angeles, and soon also interviews John Cleese. All those videos are in our YouTube channel. Today we discuss Brian's book, Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth. Welcome again to both of you, and I'll let you take it from here, Judd.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to talk to you, Brian. I've read the book.
You've actually read the book?
Unlike all those other people who interviewed you, I read the book, and not only that, I highlighted it. I made notes. Come on.
This phenomenon doesn't really happen in movies where the movie critics don't watch the movies, but it happens in books. People talk about books without reading them. So I'm grateful to you.
Well, every once in a while someone will interview you when you're promoting a movie and go, I didn't have a chance to look at it, but I'm working off your wiki page. I just want to be a better journalist than everybody else. I feel like I can do better than Rachel Maddow right now. That's really my goal, is to go deeper than even she did. But
we have more time. We have more time. That's great.
We have more time. But congratulations on the book. I thought it was really great and helped organize a lot of ideas about what's happening at Fox News that we all wonder about, which is, how did this happen? How destructive is it? And is it ever going to get better, or is this just a part of our world at this point that's never going to change? But I'll start out with a question of how you got into journalism, which is, I got the sense from the book, and you didn't spend a lot of time on this, that you were a journalism nerd in the way I was a comedy nerd as a kid. I went off and interviewed comedians when I was 15, 16 years old. I'd go hunt down John Candy or Jerry Seinfeld to interview them because I was obsessed with learning about it, and you did a version of the same thing.
Yeah, there's only two jobs that I've ever wanted in my life. When I was like 5 years old, I wanted to be a trash man because that trash truck showing up once a week was a big event in my house. I was so amazed by this huge trash truck that was, and ever since then I wanted to be a journalist. And I know that the trolls out there are going to say the two jobs are the same.
Yes.
But the truth is, I think as early as 7 years old, I remember calling into the local TV station, reporting the amount of snow on the ground, and then hearing them say my name on the TV, like Brian Stelter in Damascus. Well, they didn't know my last name. Brian in Damascus says there's 10 inches of snow, and I thought it was so crazy. They didn't know I was a kid.
Yeah.
It almost, like, I guess it could have been fake news even back then. But I always measured very carefully. But my point is, I was always addicted to TV. I was always interested in television and journalism. Of course, there's a lot of television news that's not journalism, but there's a lot that is. Yeah. And I think I learned from a very young age about this business.
And you started writing was it a blog about the news? Describe what that blog was.
Yeah, I mean, this was the TV news version of like Nikki Fink at her height doing Deadline. Like, this was, my inspiration actually was more Matt Drudge. This was my attempt to be the Drudge of TV news, obsessing over Fox and MSNBC and CNN. And this was in the mid 2000s. So this was post-Iraq War, pre-Katrina. This was in the Bush years when Fox was starting to go really right and MSNBC was going left. And actually a lot of the stories I was telling was about CNN struggling to know what to do in this news war. But back then, I gotta be honest, compared to what Fox is now, the network was a lot more grounded. It was a lot more reality-based. When Fox News started, they had shows about your pets and travel and medicine. Like, it wasn't all politics all the time the way it seems like our whole world is now.
Well, a lot of what the book is about is the evolution of how Fox News changed. And I kept thinking about the movie Network when I was reading the book, because Patty Chayefsky's Network talked about corporations buying the networks and basically buying the news, and suddenly they were servicing the needs of these giant global mega corporations. And there was that famous scene with Ned Beatty where he listed all of the giant corporations in the world, and it was truly terrifying. And that really seems to be what has happened, which is these companies own the news, and on some level it seems to affect their choice about what to present on the news, in subtle and not so subtle forms. And what I found interesting was just the slow creep at Fox News, which you discussed, which is there's 9/11, and it moves a little more to the right. The Iraq War, it moves more to the right. And then with President Obama, it moves more right. And it's almost like this organic adjustment to the desires of their owners and the audience to suddenly just present this point of view and not even challenge the audience in any way anymore.
I like to say that every turn Fox takes is a turn to the right. And that was definitely true, in the mid-2000s. It was very true when Obama took office. You think about the rise of the Tea Party, right? Mm-hmm. Suddenly there's a black president and there's a female Speaker of the House. And all of a sudden there's these right-wing groups saying, don't take my money. Fox was promoting that in 2009. That was one of those turns to the right. But they all pale in comparison to what happened starting in 2015 when Trump entered the race and when Fox hitched onto the Trump train. It was like that was the ultimate turn at that. Yeah. And your point about the owners versus the audience is it's so complicated. And I don't know exactly what the right answer to that is. It is partly on the owners, the Murdochs. It's partly on the audience. They're feeding what the audience wants. So I think over time, what we've seen at Fox is what we've seen in the GOP and all across right-wing media. It has become more extreme. The rhetoric's gotten more extreme over time. Like 15 years ago, Sean Hannity was on Fox. He wasn't saying journalism is dead. What a stupid lie. But he says it every day. Journalism is dead. He wasn't talking in that extreme way until the Obama years, and then especially in the Trump years.
It reminds me of entertainment in a lot of ways, because with movies and television, they chase concepts which they think will bring them the most money. So in the 70s, you might have Jiggle TV. And then in other eras, suddenly every show is about really horrifying crime. And you have CSI and Law and Order. And the shows will, reflect the desires of the audience. And we see that on streaming, where you see, wow, there's a lot of shows with like kids being murdered, right? Because in the algorithm, for some reason, people must want to see crime shows about women and children being victims of violence. And so suddenly there's just an enormous amount of these shows. Or in the movies, the studios realize if we do big spectacles, maybe we can make $1 billion. And now they don't want to make small dramas anymore, because you're not going to make $1 billion off of a small drama. And it seems to be with Fox News, they've decided the money is this turn to the right. That's where the money is. And if anyone at Fox, who's in charge of journalistic standards, said to everybody, this is wrong. We have created a situation that's making people unsafe. They're not taking the pandemic seriously. There's a rise of white nationalism, white supremacy. We need to make an adjustment here. That on some level, they think they would lose money if they went on the air one day and said, Trump's really lying about masks, for instance, or the vaccine safety. And so they don't do it for a financial reason.
I think that what you were describing that is true, but I don't know that it's on the minds of the staffers as they're doing it. I think a lot of these, a lot of what happens at Fox is almost it's by remote control at this point. It's on cruise control, as one producer there said to me. So I don't think, and this is just based on my interviews with the sources there, I don't think they're individually thinking to themselves, this company will be less profitable if we fact check Trump. But what you were saying is true. The audience does turn on the people at Fox who challenge the president's lies and lines. And the audience turns away in remarkable form. for example, the show the 5 p.m. Eastern Time talk show on Fox News, hugely high rated. The next hour is a newscast called Special Report with Bret Baier. More than 1 million viewers usually turn the channel after the pro-Trump talk show when the newscast comes on. Now, I have problems with that newscast. A lot of people think that newscast is also right-leaning, but at least looks like a newscast. Viewers don't want to watch it as much as they want to watch the pro-Trump propaganda. And that is true throughout the schedule on Fox News.
Well, one example that I thought was interesting in the book was that when the pandemic started, a lot of the voices of opinion on Fox, were saying things that, this is like the flu, and 70,000 people die in many years from the flu, and we're not even going to get close to that. So this is a giant overreaction. It's a Democratic hoax to be concerned at this level and to shut down cities. Now that we are closing in on 200,000 people dying, clearly the numbers are going to go way beyond that. There's no one on the opinion side of Fox or on the news side that says, wow, we were really wrong. And we were saying this wasn't a big deal, but now that it's about 200,000 pretty soon, we need to take this way more seriously. You never get that. And that's what I know, that it's hard to imagine people in a boardroom or in Lachlan Murdoch's office saying, yeah, we can't challenge all these people because we'll lose money. But I think that those conversations do happen. I do think they have to make a conscious choice at some point to not say to people, the information coming out of this network, we now know because there have been, people doing the questioning about this, that people who watch Fox take the pandemic less seriously. And if they take it less seriously, they wear masks less often and they don't social distance. And that means more people watching Fox are dying than are watching other news services. So as a result of our lack of interest in really educating people about the dangers of this, people are dying. And it is a conscious choice to not make that an important part of what they present on their network.
The history of this from February and March is so damning. I obviously rewrote the beginning of the book because of what was happening with the pandemic in this spring and this summer. Originally, this book didn't mention the pandemic, of course. It wasn't going to be called Hoax. But when Trump and Hannity both used the word hoax in connection to the virus, they were both complaining about Democrats. So they said the Democrats are making up a hoax. Even that use of the word, even though they weren't calling the virus a hoax, it was still dangerous because it suggested you didn't have to take this very seriously. It gave permission to their fans to kind of tune out the warnings about the virus at the end of February and the beginning of March. And so that's ultimately why we titled this Hoax, is because of that dangerous rhetoric. When I was working on this, I made the timeline, Judd, of February, March. What were they saying on TV? What was Trump saying at the White House? And it lines up, unfortunately, perfectly. Both Fox and Trump started to really change their tune on the same day in March. Maybe not a coincidence. Maybe Trump took his cues from Fox and Friends, as he so often does. He started to, in the way he did, take the virus more seriously, and so did Fox. But it was too late. It was too late. The virus was already silently spreading across the country, and so many people let their guard down because of what the rhetoric was on TV. I do want to say, though, I'm not only blaming Fox and Trump. Lots of people made lots of mistakes. I do think it's worth being fair to, like, some governors made mistakes, some mayors made mistakes, but Trump bears more of the blame because he is the ultimate leader of the country. And he was on there on Fox, downplaying the threat. It's kind of like he left the back door open. He left the front door open and he closed the back door. He closed the back door because he restricted travel from China. But the front door was wide open. That was travel from Europe. And that's mostly how the virus entered the U.S.
Well, I don't think an adjustment has been made, though, because at the time of this taping, the Republican conventions are on. And, Melania spoke last night to a fairly large crowd of people. I didn't see almost anyone wearing a mask. Certainly the president wasn't wearing a mask in the middle of of that crowd. And I'm sure they'd say, oh, we tested everybody, but the signal to the country is it's okay. Every time you see these people not wearing a mask, you're telling people maybe you don't have to wear a mask. And I guess the issue is that will get noticed on other networks. And on Fox, you will not have a person at Fox go, wow, if you cut to that crowd and they were all wearing masks, that would signal to people to wear a mask. That would be a powerful message. Or even if when everyone walked up to the podium, they were wearing a mask and they took it off to make their speach. And I think the idea that nobody at Fox News will even point that out is an ownership decision. It's a Rupert Murdoch, Lachlan Murdoch decision to not create an environment where you're allowed to say that, where you'll be punished. And what I found most interesting in the book was the idea that if you work there and say you're one of the contracted pundits, if one day you go against something Trump said and say it was inaccurate or you disagreed, that your bookings start disappearing and suddenly Hannity doesn't have you on and Tucker Carlson doesn't have you on. And it creates a conditioning that if you challenge the president, you may lose your job and your presence will diminish. And then maybe you'll lose your $500,000 a year to be giving your opinions about things. And I thought that was explained very well, because I don't think the audience understand that. There's a disincentive to speak the truth to power.
Yeah, the incentive structures are what matter most. My incentive structure at CNN is to be as accurate as possible, because if I'm not, I will be held accountable. There's a standards and practices department, and I have bosses who will call me out, and that's how it should work. I mean, look, I try my best, but I've made a couple of mistakes, in my time at CNN, and I've been in the doghouse. There's a moment where I'll have a tough conversation with my boss, and that's the way it should be.
Yes.
And it just doesn't work that way as often at Fox. I'm not claiming it never works that way. There are some people that try to uphold standards, but there's not a standards and practices department. There's not the same kind of journalistic vetting. And so instead, the incentive structure is the opposite. It is to lean into the propaganda, lean into the pro-Trump nonsense, because that's what the audience wants, it's what the management seems to want. Part of the problem here, Judd, is a lack of leadership. There's a lack of clear leadership at Fox. People don't really know what the Murdochs want from them, and so they just keep on doing what they're doing. But clearly, to your point, if Lachlan Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch wanted things to be different on the air, things would be different on the air. Yeah. That is the reality of how this world works. And clearly they are okay with what's been going on the network, partly because it prints money. $2 billion in profits. That's the path Fox News is on. $2 billion in profits a year. I had an executive say to me, we print money in the basement as a joke. Mm-hmm. But the best story about these incentives, I think, is about Judge Andrew Napolitano. He is the top legal analyst on Fox News. He's one of the most interesting characters there because he's known Trump for decades. They're old friends. But he's a lawyer. He understood that Trump was guilty of crimes relating to Ukraine. He understood that obstruction of justice had been proven by Bob Mueller. Like, Napolitano called it out on the air. He called it out, and for that, he was shunned by Trump. Trump hate tweeted about him repeatedly. Napolitano lost some of his time slots. He wasn't getting booked as often on shows. I had a producer from Maria Bartiromo's show say that Maria would only book him talk about non-Trump stories. Because if they booked him about Trump, Bartiromo would get too angry, get too upset with him, and it wouldn't go well. That's the perverse structure that's in place there.
And that Trump is calling the network constantly complaining about the coverage. And that's one thing that's really interesting in the book, is it's very specific about how often he's calling Rupert Murdoch, how often he's calling Hannity, and that he has this constant dialogue with the network. So the audience doesn't realize, I think they do now because it's come out, that, according to the book, he has an almost constant communication with Sean Hannity. And in the book, you talk about him calling before the show and after the show. And that at this point, it's difficult to know if certain ideas are coming from Fox and Friends or people like Sean Hannity or from the president. He's watching the network and he's being set off to talk about things. And there's a sense that they're both manipulating each other. But it's also in a way that I don't think the audience understands. And I thought the most troubling example of it was you talk about Tucker Carlson talking about how the United States should not attack Iran last year. And that may have been an important reason why we didn't attack Iran.
Last summer. That's right.
But could you talk a little bit about that story?
This is when Iran struck an American drone. Remember, downed an American drone, and there were questions about how Trump would respond. Trump himself claimed that U.S. missiles were locked and loaded. He had an expression to that effect, saying that the retaliation was about to begin when he called it off. And what we now know about that is he called Tucker Carlson beforehand. I'm not claiming Tucker was the only person that influenced him, because Tucker was not. But Carlson had been on the air very much as a dove, not a hawk. He was advocating against John Bolton. Carlson was advocating against striking Iran. And I think what happened that day was Trump needed to hear it again. Trump needed to hear it again. Like, it wasn't enough to watch it on his DVR or watch it on live TV. Yeah. He needed to hear it from Tucker again. So he called Carlson up. And Carlson kind of has a position about Trump that goes like this. He's not going to call the White House, but if the White House calls him, he'll answer. That's the way he differentiates from Hannity. You know, Hannity is much more proactive. Carlson just takes the calls when they come in. So the president calls Carlson, asks, what should I do? What should we do? And he says exactly what he said on TV, you know, why it would be crazy to bomb Iran. He went through the reasons. And Carlson later told friends, I think Trump just needed to be reminded of what he believes, like reminded of who he is. That's not why the voters elected you, was basically Carlson's message. So I had a guy at Fox say to me, well, I guess I'm glad Tucker is running the country and not Sean Hannity, which is it's a ludicrous thing to say, but there's a little grain of truth in that about who is in Trump's ear at any given time and what the policy impacts are. You know, the other person that influenced Trump that day, one of the others, was a general, one of these Fox military analysts named General Jack Keane. Keane was on the air talking about that time in the 80s when America accidentally shot down an Iranian plane, killing scores of innocent people. Trump may have never heard that story before, because when he heard it live on Fox, it really stuck with him and it really impacted him. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, we're in a situation where the president doesn't know basic history, but he is at least hearing some of it on TV. I guess the only thing worse would be if he never even heard it on TV at all. I don't know, but gosh, the number of examples of the president getting information from Fox could have filled an entire second book. Like I had to cut so many of these examples because, you know, there are literally thousands of times when he has been influenced by Fox.
You know, you would think that the people who work at Fox would be terrified that this relationship has evolved like that. You know, if I was Lachlan Murdoch and I was aware that, you know, my hosts had direct lines to the president, which in the book you said Lachlan Murdoch does not want to have that type of relationship with the president, that it would be a position you wouldn't want to have. I mean, I would think as an owner of a network giving out information during a pandemic, I would, just for my soul, would want to feel like I had saved lives, I had communicated properly. Certainly you could understand how a network could be right-leaning and wants to deregulate or lower taxes, but when you're really getting to the place where you're covering for a president who doesn't seem mentally equipped to handle a pandemic, and you're creating space for him to give bad information, which you're supporting, which leads to people dying, it really requires, I don't know, a level of greed or disassociation to not be horrified that, you know, Tucker Carlson apparently in the book went to Mar-a-Lago to talk to Trump because he was concerned that Trump wasn't taking the pandemic seriously.
Yes, because a White House aide asked him to go. This is what's so remarkable. There were aides in the White House who felt like Trump did not get it. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation. And Carlson was the exception to the rule when it comes to the pandemic. In January and February, he was raising alarms on his show. Now, he was partly raising alarms because he has this anti-China view, and it fit into his narrative against China. But he was raising alarms. So he was asked by a White House aide to drive across Florida. Carlson was at his home over on the Gulf Coast of Florida. He was asked to drive to Mar-a-Lago, go see Trump, try to talk some sense into the president. And that's what Carlson did. He ended up walking straight into the middle of a birthday party for Kimberly Guilfoyle. It was like a Fox News reunion. But Carlson was able to get some one-on-one time with Trump, tried to talk to him about the coronavirus. And even that didn't work right away, because a couple days later, Trump's still out there engaging in ridiculous rhetoric, downplaying the threat of the virus. It wasn't until the end of it was like March 13th. It was really the middle of March when both Fox News and Trump started to change their tone. And, even that only had limited impact. But for example, the Fox and Friends was told, you have to have a doctor on the air every day so that, we're not going to spread as much medical misinformation anymore. So I do want to give them a little bit of credit. They did make some changes that improved the tone of the coverage. However, within 2 weeks, you have a host on Fox, Steve Hilton, saying, we need to figure out how to reopen America. The cure cannot be worse than the disease. An hour later, Trump says on Twitter, the cure cannot be worse than the problem. So remember, this was back when Trump said, we should reopen by Easter. The pews should be full by Easter, which was crazy and impossible. But our entire country wasted like 4 days on that idea, and it all came from Fox. And look, I write in the book that no one can ever know for sure how many people died who otherwise wouldn't have died were it not for irresponsible news coverage, were it not for irresponsible presidential rhetoric. We will never know. Here's what I do know. I know staffers at that network are embarrassed by it now. They say what we were doing was hazardous to our viewers. I had a very senior executive at Fox say to me, some of our coverage was outlandish. So there are people who see it and they recognize what went wrong. But I don't think there's been a lot of soul searching institutionally, meaning, like at the corporate level, at the Murdoch level that you're talking about. I don't think there's been that kind of reflection.
One part of the book that I also thought was fascinating was you talk about these large business deals that the Murdochs are occasionally making and how it affects the coverage on Fox News. So when they were working on the Sky TV deal, that was the moment when Bill O'Reilly was getting in trouble for all these sexual harassment cases, and that possibly one of the motivations for getting rid of him was it was a distraction to them getting the Sky TV deal closed. And then you talked about the deal to have the movie studio and other businesses acquired by Disney.
Yeah.
And at that moment, there was an adjustment in the news because they were trying to get federal approval for this merger. What was the news story at that time that it seemed to affect?
Yeah. Well, first, the Sky deal is really interesting because Rupert is over in the UK. That's where the Sky deal is. He wants to take over the rest of this British broadcasting empire. And he's worried that the American network he has is going to embarrass him. A source said to me, Rupert just wanted to get rid of the stench of all these sexual harassment lawsuits and complaints. So that's partly why O'Reilly was let go. The truth is the Murdochs had just signed a new contract. They knew about some of his ghosts and his skeletons. But the stench became too disgusting, I suppose, is the analogy, and they were worried about their business interests. We also saw this when I mentioned Judge Napolitano. He went on the air and claimed that Obama had tapped Trump's phones via the British government, via GCHQ. The British government came out and denied that. And Trump said, oh, well, go ask Napolitano. Don't ask me, ask the judge, trying to blame Fox for that mistake. And at the time, again, the Murdochs were concerned about this because they didn't want to piss off the British government because of the Sky deal. So you have these cases where your American network is making trouble for the rest of your global media conglomerate. And that's a wild thing to see. When it comes to the Disney deal, I think it's really revealing that, Rupert decides to sell, but he keeps Fox News. He keeps Fox Sports, but he keeps the news division. It's what he cares about the most. And in the book, I actually have some details about CNN, where I work, where Rupert is calling the head of AT&T, trying to buy CNN, basically offering to buy CNN. There is some speculation out there that maybe he was doing that in concert with Trump. In other words, and again, this is only a theory. I don't think this will ever be proven or disproven, but this is a theory. The theory goes like this. Trump, Murdoch, they become friendly. They have an alliance of sorts, the mutually beneficial relationship. So even though Murdoch, insults Trump in private and calls him crazy and things like that, they have a mutually beneficial relationship. So the theory goes like this. Did Trump and Murdoch try to get AT&T to sell CNN as a condition of the federal government approving AT&T's takeover of the rest of Time Warner? Now that is a theory that folks do believe in corporate circles. AT&T passed. AT&T said, no, we're not selling CNN. But the timing of Rupert Murdoch's phone calls to AT&T is very curious. I lay it out in the book. You look at the timing and you wonder if Murdoch was working with Trump on this.
Well, the government did try to prevent AT&T from taking over Time Warner, and maybe it was hard to do when they had instant approval to do the Disney Fox
deal. Exactly.
So it just didn't make any sense that you would stop the other one.
Judd, you've been such an outspoken critic of Fox in Hollywood. That's why I was so interested in hearing your take on the book. Why do you think more people don't speak out against this media company?
I think that people are just concerned about their own careers and their own money, and for the same reasons why certain journalists won't speak out against Trump. There are people on the progressive side that ultimately will still do business because that's who's paying, for their rent. And, that lack of courage to stand up and say, I feel this is wrong, exists on both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, Hollywood obviously is shameless in their willingness to cozy up to people who they think are doing very unethical, even criminal acts. We see this with Saudi Arabia, with the prince in Saudi Arabia. We see this with the Murdochs, where even when the president is caging children and Fox News is providing cover for that and not fighting hard against it, you'll still see the Murdochs at all the parties. And they're not shunned for any of this. Even now with the pandemic, and you could say Fox News, clearly costs a lot of people their lives by not helping, provide the best possible information in a vigorous way, that you'll still see them everywhere. And I think that when you look at people like Colin Kaepernick, who really made a choice to sacrifice his career. He felt it was worth it to make the statements he wanted to make and to stand up for civil rights. There are very few people who do that.
I wish Lachlan Murdoch would come on with you and take you on and tell you why you're wrong and tell you why, but I say that because you never really hear from these executives in public. You're right. They do show up on the pre-pandemic party circuit, in the awards circuit, but rarely has Lachlan Murdoch given a real interview about Fox News.
Oh, never.
Suzanne Scott, the CEO of Fox News Media, she's given only a handful of interviews ever, and she's never fully addressed what she knew about Roger Ailes' abuse.
It's indefensible. They know it's indefensible because I think for many of them, they've made a choice, which is to believe something very simple. If they didn't say it on our network, they'd say it on another network. And it's the ultimate rationalization for having all these opinions out there. They're like, oh, they say it on the radio. They say it elsewhere. And I feel like, people make a choice about what to put out into the world. We all decide if we want to be a good person or a bad person. We decide if we want to sell out or not sell out. And a lot of people are very comfortable just not caring. And so, you would hope that they're tortured at home, but they're not. They're just like thinking, yeah, there's a lot of kooks out there. And if we put them on our network, we'll make a lot of money. And if we don't put them on our network, they're going to be on another network.
Right. And they'll say there's kooks on the left too. They'll say there's crazies on the other side too.
Yep, absolutely. And you know what? I think that is a rationalization that maybe you can be okay with until the pandemic, until kids are in cages.
Well, I'll tell you, you mentioned kids in cages. One of the themes throughout Hoax is the journalists who do decide to leave. And why do they decide to leave? And a lot of these stories have not been told before, because when people leave Fox News, they don't usually say why. Like Shepard Smith left last year, got a lot of attention. Didn't really talk about why he was fed up and left. And a lot of journalists people haven't even heard of who left. Also commentators, Abby Huntsman is one who comes to mind. She was on The View more recently, but she was on Fox and Friends Weekend at the start of the Trump presidency. And her final straw was the family separation policy. When that story blew up into international news in June of 2018, she just found it to be so heartbreaking to sit on that couch on that morning show and listen to her colleagues defend it and have to tiptoe around the Trump administration's mistakes, that she decided to leave. She had been talking to ABC about going to The View, and that's what tipped her over the fence. And I've got other stories like that in the book of journalists who just said, I can't take it anymore. But it raises this question about why do others stay? And I think you're hitting on one of the reasons. You can justify it by saying it's free speech, it's diversity of opinion, there's kooks everywhere. I find that the other reasons include money. Obviously, we talked about money and how much money their people are making. Power, proximity to power, feeling like you get to influence the president, but also lack of other options. Yeah. I wonder if you think this is a legit answer or not. People say, I don't know if I'd get hired anywhere else.
I think you said that the stench of working there, you're not going to get one of the other jobs if you were really seen as a face of Fox News.
Right, like try to think about how many people have successfully gone from Fox to another network. Megyn Kelly tried. I actually argue in the book that she's the first example of someone in the Trump age saying, I can't stay at Fox anymore. This is not going to work for me. I'm not able to produce the propaganda that they're going to want. So she went to NBC, and that didn't work out. There have been a few who have left successfully. Alison Camerata is now a CNN anchor. Catherine Herridge is a CBS reporter. She's one of those people who looked around last year and said, the bosses here, they're not strong leaders, and they don't really want news. They want, inside Fox, it's called programming. That's their term for opinion shows, programming, which is really an entertainment word, right? So she's like, the bosses don't want news, they want programming, so I'm out. And there's a lot of those folks. So that is definitely one of my themes. The other reason that people mostly gave me for why they don't leave, some of them certainly say they want to make change from the inside. They think they can make a difference. They think they can make the content better. But the biggest reason that people brought up, other than money and power and lack of options, is Fox does feel like a family. They do take care of their people. When Brett Baer was injured in a skiing accident, Suzanne Scott offered the company plane right away. Like those sorts of things, it's not just the private plane or the Super Bowl tickets. It's, the fact that they got to design their own offices and build in their own closets. It's the sense of family you get from working with your colleagues. Do you think that's all BS, or do you think that's a real, I think that's a real emotion for people?
Well, certainly when you give people a nice looking office and redo the carpeting in it every once in a while, people will, get sucked into thinking that they're being treated well.
It boosts morale. That's
yes. A lot of it, when you talk about in the book, is just how well paid, the biggest stars there are. I thought that what was, interesting there was, the competition between the biggest stars.
Yeah, we should talk about that. That's interesting.
You were talking about, Bill O'Reilly and how popular he was, but, when he disappeared and they moved Hannity up, suddenly there's this competition between Tucker Carlson and Hannity and Laura Ingraham. Can you explain some of those dynamics?
Yeah, Sean Hannity, for example, go back to the O'Reilly days. O'Reilly was always number one, by far, on cable news. Hannity was always second banana. And that relationship was not really a relationship at all. The two men did not talk to each other, didn't like each other, but they studied each other's ratings very carefully. Interestingly, though, when O'Reilly was thrown overboard in 2017, Hannity felt sorry for him. Hannity even invited him back on Fox, which really angered a lot of staffers who said, why are you allowing a guy with a history of sexual harassment allegations against him back into our building? Management fired him. Why is he allowed back inside? but that just goes to show the lack of strong leadership, or the fact that Hannity's the boss, I guess. Sometimes when people ask Sean Hannity who's in charge of Fox, he says, "I am," and it's not entirely a joke. He is now not the second banana. He is now number one. He is occasionally losing to Tucker Carlson, and there is perhaps some tension now between Tucker and Sean because of the ratings race. But Hannity came to power in the Trump years and wielded that power. Whether it's through conspiracy theories, feeding the president bad information, that program, kind of is core to Fox's identity now. And I know that some hosts are known to slip ratings reports to the president in order to say, hey, come on my show, not their show. There's this internal competition to be the Trumpiest, because that's the shortcut to relevance and ratings.
And that seems to be one of the most disturbing details in the book, which is people would, kiss the president's ass to get access, to get an interview. The interview would elevate them in stature in Fox News, which becomes a disincentive to ever speak out against the president. So you have a series
challenge him in the interviews, even.
Yes.
Ask him hard questions. Yeah, look, I've got several. There are multiple staffers at Fox, multiple friends of Hannity, who say he calls the president crazy. That he describes these phone calls with the president, that are so stressful. Like, and here's the thing about Hannity. I thought when he became number one at Fox, he was on the top of the ratings list. He was the biggest star. I thought this would be a huge, wonderful time in his life, but no, it's been pretty stressful.
Can you imagine having Donald Trump call you every other day to want to talk for extended periods of time about the news, get your advice, and then he actually takes your advice? I mean, that is like every person's worst nightmare. I was at a play and I was with a friend, and we bumped into Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots. And my friend really confronted him about his friendship with the president. But what we got out of this very, brief 10 minutes talking to him is that all of these very wealthy people or connected people, they all basically are vying for phone time with the president. And they're very aware that the last thing they say may affect something that Donald Trump does that day or the next day. He's certainly surrounded by sycophants who have agendas.
Well, you hit on the problem, which is if you're advising the president, you need to help him and not hurt him. And I think one of my arguments in Hoax is that when Hannity tries to help Trump, he often hurts Trump. Now, liberals might not be watching and saying, "Good, Hannity, keep doing this." But here's my perspective on this. Hannity's trying to do Trump a service, but actually doing him a disservice by focusing on culture war stories, by feeding him disinformation. He actually hurts the Trump presidency. I think it's an interesting thought experiment to wonder, what if the president hadn't been addicted to Fox? What if he had come into office and he had been surrounded by people who turned off the TV sometimes or took away his Twitter account, who tried to help him focus? Would it have gone differently? And you might say that's impossible and that never would have happened. But, this addiction to Fox really hurt the president over and over and over again. And for example, during the pandemic, as the pandemic was beginning in March, Trump was calling Hannity asking, how are my ratings? How are the ratings for the briefings? He wanted to know how he was rating, it's disgraceful that the president was focused on that metric. He was interested in that metric. A good friend would have said to President Trump, stop. Do not tweet about your ratings. Do not ask me about your ratings again. Focus on saving lives. Like, it's that kind of relationship that Trump doesn't seem to have. He doesn't, he has these Fox News fans who are vying for his attention and trying to book him on TV, but are actually hurting him, I think, when they're trying to help him.
I think what we're learning is that the president obviously is not as intelligent as we hoped the president would be. And certainly he has some sort of mental health issues, which, we all debate what the...
Oh, you're not allowed to say that, Judd. Hannity rips into me for forever bringing up mental fitness. Oh, my goodness. Oh, no, you're not allowed to talk about that.
Which is fascinating. Because so clearly, this what we're learning from Mary Trump and Marianne Trump, his sister, is that it's common knowledge in the family what is wrong with him as a person. And so they want to call out Joe Biden and say, oh, he's slipping. But clearly, when you get to like man, camera, television, like you're aware that something is happening here. And I think we all believe that the president doesn't really have the ability to read, to understand complex facts. And so when something like a pandemic happens, where he really needs to understand science, he can't get there. There's no way for him to get there. So if someone said to him, if everyone in the country wore a mask, we probably could open up faster, the economy would do better, and maybe we should give businesses some help opening up, but with masks and with social distancing. So he both could support opening up, but really safely. But he won't do it because someone got to him about it doesn't look cool to wear a mask. You don't look tough, or whatever that is, or it's not. We lose our freedom if we wear a mask. So he can't even make the simple, rational choices which help him. Like I always think about I always think about student debt, right? If he found a way to help people with their college debt, the amount of people who would vote for him would be ridiculous. He probably could get reelected off of it as an issue, but he won't even consider it due to some business interest in his ear about it. And I think that's what we realize, that there's something wrong with him because he won't do the easy things that would help him.
Well, I'll tell you, I've got reporting in the book from 2017 where Fox executives, other prominent figures of the network were saying to me, he is not well. And this was especially in the wake of Charlottesville, which I think was a national wake-up call about the president. These are folks at Fox who are in touch with Trump, and they are saying to me, he's not well. And they're saying that in the same concerned way that you talk about a grandpa. When a grandfather is sick or a grandmother is sick, the whole family suffers. And I do wonder if we're going to look back at the Trump years and say, is that what happened? Like, is that what was going on? And again, I'm saying that, taking this from conversations from folks at Fox, because they're the ones that are more in touch with them than anybody at CNN or the other networks. But he has so effectively merged his operation at the White House with Fox that they have the same interests, right? Look at what's going to happen. Look at his acceptance speech on the South Lawn, where Sean Hannity has a special stage, a special place to anchor the program. That's the kind of example of special treatment that we've seen constantly throughout the Trump presidency. And, it makes it difficult to imagine a scenario where Fox would really break with him in any serious way.
One other issue you talk about is how this feedback loop between the president and Fox News led to training the audience to not believe any fact that doesn't come from the president. And even if they don't believe the president, they also don't believe the other side. And that in all situations, you don't trust information in a very Orwellian way. How did that evolve?
This is fundamentally what's broken about our information ecosystem. And it's not just Fox that broke it. It's not just Trump that broke it. There's been decades of messaging from right-wing outlets and advocacy groups saying you can't trust the biased liberal media. But Trump took it to so many new levels. First, attacking the media during the campaign, then saying fake news in January of 2017, then saying enemy of the people, then saying hoax. He's gone from saying hoax once a month to once a day. It's like he's trying to shock us more. It's like as people become numb to the shock of his anti-media lies, it's like he feels like he has to shout it louder and louder in order to get us to notice and listen. And I think the good news, Judd, is that most people don't listen. Like, not don't listen. Most people see through it. Most people know that when he says hoax, it's just another hoax.
But what you were saying about the word hoax is that when he said fake news, it could be interpreted as just a mistake. And then he switched everything to hoax, which meant that there was like a maliciousness to the choice to do something.
Well, that's right. If you just unpack the word hoax coming from hocus pocus, like the word hoax means someone's trying to trick you, someone's trying to fool you, hurt you even. There's a nastiness to that word. And I think it's notable that he uses it at least once a day on average so far this year, and that Fox then repeats it. This is why the feedback loop is so loopy. something will start on Fox, then Trump will pick up on it, then Fox will run with it for days and never acknowledge that it started on Fox. And I think there's a dishonesty to that when they get a fact wrong, and then Trump gets a fact wrong, and then CNN points out that Trump got the fact wrong. But there's no, we need to also point out that it started with Fox. Again, that he got misinformed from there. It gets to what you were saying earlier about being a producer or an anchor of these shows and the responsibility and the pressure you would feel if you were the owner, or if you were the anchor or the producer, to get it right and to be careful and to be precise. But instead, what happens at Fox and Friends is they use Trump's attention as a retention tool, meaning I had a couple producers tell me that when they were thinking about leaving the show, the boss said, well, you get to influence the president. He tweets what you say. You don't want to leave here and lose that power, do you?
The one case that was so scary was the Seth Rich story on Fox, and how they never took responsibility for it. And it revealed a new level of cruelty in the attempt to make the president look good. So, this story about this young man who was murdered was being used as a way to somehow create a conspiracy theory, which would be the reason for the hacking incident. Can you discuss and explain how that happened?
Yeah, this is really, when you zoom out, this was an attempt to say it wasn't Russia. Let Trump off the hook about Russia. Stop focusing on the Russia probe. This is really what it's about. This is at the moment when James Comey's been fired and Trump has brought Russians into the Oval Office and said, okay, now the Russia cloud's been lifted off of me. Now there's all this attention in the country about Trump and his ties to Russia and what the hell is going on. And Fox starts airing this murder mystery programming where they say that maybe Seth Rich's death, when he was shot to death one night in Washington, maybe it's because he was the real WikiLeaks leaker. Maybe he's the one that broke into the DNC and leaked all those emails, which then says it wasn't Russia. It's a way to say this was an American thing. It was an inside job. It wasn't Russia, so don't blame Russia, and thus move on from all the Trump-Russia stuff. That was the narrative on Fox, based on a lie. There was a little bit, at least, of coordination with the White House, because we know that the folks that were behind this had a meeting with Sean Spicer at the White House. And this narrative, this mystery narrative went on Fox for a week. You had Seth Rich's family asking Hannity to stop talking about it, basically saying, stop, take my dead brother's name, take my dead child's name out of your mouth, Sean. And finally, after a week, Hannity went on the air and said, I'm not going to talk about it for now. I'm going to keep investigating, but out of respect for the family, I'll stop talking about it for now. It's such a pathetic example of Fox pushing a narrative, a conspiracy narrative that had no connection to the truth. And I have to say, like in all the years since, it's been 3 years since this, it's still probably the single most shocking example of a lack of standards and vetting at the network, which is why I wrote a whole chapter on it, because I think you got to understand, it shows the lack of leadership at the channel on a day like that, or on a week like that.
And a level of cruelty, that shows that their interest in protecting the president has now led them into some really dark places. And one might say that was the beginning of QAnon and the idea of conspiracy theories and people's interest in them being used to distract from what's actually happening. And I think,
you said the important word, distract. Yeah, so much of this is about distraction. So much of what goes on Fox Prime Time is just about deflecting and distracting from Trump's scandals, from his lies, from his crises. I actually think Fox is more anti-Democrat than it is pro-Trump. It's when in doubt, they just attack Joe Biden. It's not that they're always defending Trump. It's just that they're trying to destroy the other guy.
But doesn't that lead to the potential for violence? We know that these conspiracies lead to violence sometimes, and now it's being mainstreamed. The president was asked about it the other day, and he treated it like it was any other political idea. He didn't act like it's something that's dangerous or that the FBI has said is being investigated because it's something that can lead to people getting hurt and has in the past. And
well, let's pretend we're on a Fox News show. I'm going to interrupt you, okay? This is Fox News. Hey, no, Joe, what about Antifa? What about the Democrats' violence? Like, that's how it goes every time, right? It's whataboutism. Whataboutism on every story. By the way, you know, the Soviets, whataboutism is a famed Soviet Russia tactic where they try to basically make you think everybody sucks, everybody's bad, everybody's wrong, so just trust your tribe. And I think that's a lot of what Fox's programming has devolved into. It's whataboutism, but you are correct that we know that FBI field office has warned about the domestic terror threat from QAnon. We know that the mail bomber, the guy who sent those mail bombs to CNN and Soros and Clinton and others, we know that he was a Fox News addict as well as a huge Trump fan. So we have seen examples of this extremism, this radicalization having real world consequences.
And when there's not a strong pushback by the president or Republican politicians, it is that dog whistle, it is that wink, like, might be true. And so you get a couple of people who stand up, and it's always shocking how few Republicans stand up. I mean, basically, other than Mitt Romney at this point, that there really aren't politicians who are willing to put their jobs at risk to stand up for their beliefs.
You know, think about Romney and what he did when he cast his impeachment vote. He knew that he was going to get savaged by Fox. So he gave one TV interview. He gave it to Fox. He gave it to Chris Wallace. I think he did that in part because he at least wanted the Fox audience to have to hear out his argument, have to hear out his point of view. But sure enough, on the night that Trump was acquitted by the Senate, which you'd think would be a cause for celebration on right-wing media, instead, the programming was all about Mitt Romney. They were more focused on trying to excommunicate Romney than they were about celebrating Trump's acquittal. I guess there's such a negativity or such a, it's like hitting the rage button over and over again, trying to keep people angry. That's one of the most cynical aspects of all this. And by the way, I admit there's other elements of cable news that engage in that as well, but Fox seems to be the best at it.
I don't think that the audience understands that there's an economic ecosystem with all of these jobs. And so if you're accepted, you know, by the Republican or the Democratic community, and you're in good standing, there's books and there's speaking engagements and you're invited to all the parties. And it feels like these politicians feel like if they really stand up, it's not just the main job they're going to get, it's all the connections, all the stuff around it. And that Trump has basically said, I'm going to hit you as hard as I can hit you. And there hasn't been a moment where the Republicans have said, you know what, we're more powerful than you, actually. It was interesting. We saw that with Fox, where when Trump started running for president, they didn't take him very seriously. And there were a lot of people who now work for the president who were really hard on him.
Yes.
You know, Kayleigh McEnany and Kellyanne Conway, they were very anti-Trump, and the network wasn't very pro-Trump. And then slowly, they just gave over to it.
Yeah, there's a quote in the book from somebody saying, from a host saying, the untold story of Fox and Trump is how one by one, all the hosts decided to get on the Trump train, where they looked around, they saw the incentives, they saw the opportunity. Even Hannity, for example, you know, his show was getting pretty stale pre-Trump. There were conversations back in the Roger Ailes days about, well, what should we do with Hannity? Should we maybe give him a liberal co-host again to make the show more interesting? And then Trump comes along and he's the most interesting thing in the world. And if you think about it that way, Hannity saw Trump as a way to gain relevance, you know, to regain relevance. And that happened all across right-wing media. Hitching to Trump was a way to succeed personally and professionally.
There doesn't seem to be a space on any of the networks for a real assessment of the ideas of the other party. You know, you'll never see something on MSNBC about, does deregulation actually help the economy? You know, does lower taxes help the economy? You know, the deep exploration of conservative ideas on a progressive network and vice versa doesn't ever seem to happen. You won't see on Fox News, is there a way to deal with the immigration problem? without caging children. Let's explore what else could be done. And isn't that the saddest part about it, is there isn't enough time spent exploring solutions.
Maybe you and I should have a show together on cable news.
That's why we're here. This has been an audition, and I think I nailed it. Are we going to take a question from Ted? Is Ted going to ask a question?
Yeah, we have some audience questions that were submitted. One comes from a lady who says, do you feel that CNN, I mean, some of the criticism that CNN gets is that CNN is also opinionated or has gotten opinionated. Do you agree with that? How do you feel about CNN? The statement she makes is, in response to Fox, I feel CNN too has gotten opinionated.
I think the biggest change I've seen on CNN as a viewer as well as an anchor is that a lot of us as anchors are doing these monologues, these essays, usually at the start of a show, sometimes at the end of a show. It feels like sometimes, 4 or 5 of our shows every day, I'll have these essays where the anchor's talking straight to the camera, trying to explain what's going on, oftentimes about Trump. And I know some viewers view those as opinionated. I think they're a way to break down, the war on truth and try to win it, basically. Sometimes the best way to fact check Trump, to rebut his lies, is that straight to camera monologue approach. That actually Bill O'Reilly pioneered. Fox was doing it a long time ago. So I get that there are a lot more of those these days. I've been doing a lot of those these days because I think it's the most effective way to respond to some of the attacks and the lies out there. I guess what I would say is, it's not partisan to stand up for facts and decency and democracy. And what I see a lot of on CNN and on MSNBC is people trying to do that. And in the context of Trump claiming that, there's a lot of fake news or whatever, it can come across as anti-Trump when it is really just trying to be pro-decency or pro-truth or pro-democracy.
There's no way not to seem partisan when the president lies, 10, 15,000 times. And if you say he lied, people think that you're partisan.
Well, I always go back to the day where he said, this was I put it in the book, I think January 24th, 25th, where he said, days after taking office, that 3 to 5 million people had voted illegally. And if you don't speak out against that kind of crazy comment, then I think you're part of the problem. That's the dynamic we're in, but it's a difficult dynamic for journalists because we are intrinsically, deep down in our cores, not comfortable, speaking out in our own voice. I guess I'm gonna put it this way. We are much more comfortable quoting one side and quoting the other side and having a debate and having an argument. That is much more comfortable for a TV producer or for many writers. But that's not the way to tell the truth in this time.
Next question. Both parties will have produced their own shows and conventions, and then the next stage to present the candidates is going to be the debates. Question is, what machinations are taking place about who gets to be the moderator? Now, that's a questioner is saying, do the parties have some say in who the moderators are, or does the debate commission pick?
Yeah, the debate commission is in charge of this. This is a bipartisan commission that's been around for decades. In kind of, it's almost like a vestige of an earlier era in politics where Republicans and Democrats would work together on something. That's what this commission does. And up until now, most candidates gone along with it, have agreed to show up. We will see what Trump and Biden do, but Biden has committed and Trump is committed to attending. So the question is, who will moderate? My understanding is what happens is all the networks certainly push certain individuals, encourage the selection of certain individuals. I would imagine TV agents and others would also be angling for certain individuals to be considered. I do think it's going to be more complicated than usual this year because Trump has so many objections about so many different TV anchors. And the commission has said that it's up to the commission, not up to Trump.
He also wouldn't want somebody like Chris Wallace. It seems like anybody who has asked him a direct, not even a difficult question, but just a real question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Chris Wallace, would be an obvious option, right? He'd be an obvious candidate for something like this. And I wonder if Trump actually liked that tough questioning from Chris Wallace. There was some reporting that said White House aides thought Trump liked it because it made him look like he could handle tough questions. But if you listen to the answers, the answers were quite troubling. It's
how troubling was the Axios interview, when he started taking out his graphs. The graphs had like 3 bars on him. It's like they made the graph for like a 5-year-old. It was the least complicated bit of information. And what do you think the aftermath of that is with the people around Trump when he does an interview with a real journalist who follows up and calls him out on misinformation? Do you think that window closes for anybody else who doesn't work for Fox News getting to talk to him?
It'll be interesting to see if he does any of those other interviews between now and November, because we know he has these debates. I expect that he's going to want to stoke his base and go on Fox quite frequently. Will he go on the major networks between now and November is an interesting question. He has been on 60 Minutes, for example. He has been on with ABC. He's never given CNN an interview since Inauguration Day. If I were him and I wanted to show that I was bold and tough and willing to handle tough questions, I would go on CNN. It would be a hell of a TV event, but I would be surprised if it happened between now and November.
Next question is, gentleman says, I feel the media lost out and gave away too much with the daily pandemic press conferences.
Right, by airing them, by in some cases airing misinformation from the president and his aides.
Correct. How do you feel about that, and how could those have been done better?
This continues to be a tug of war sort of thing where there's definitely discussion and debate within newsrooms about this, not actual newsrooms since we're all at home now, but in virtual newsrooms, there's definitely a lot of different opinions about this. I think there is one side that says if the president is making announcements, it should be broadcast, people should know what he's saying, and then it should be analyzed and fact-checked and put into context. There's definitely another camp that says he has such a record of disinformation and misinforming that he shouldn't have that ability to just all of a sudden get airtime. And you've seen CNN kind of thread this needle, sometimes taking the press conferences live. Sometimes, this is interesting, this is kind of relatively new. If he's giving a speech at the beginning, we won't always show that live. But when he's taking questions, we will show it live, because that way at least journalists are involved. Journalists are able to push back or follow up. Because I think that's an interesting middle ground where when there's question and answer, it'll be shown live.
Well, the scientists have disappeared, though. All the scientists have disappeared, though, in those press conferences. I mean, it started out and Trump was on the side and he would poke in for a little bit. And then slowly, Fauci disappeared. And then it just becomes a campaign speech.
And I think it is worth keeping in mind, even if CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS were all to stop carrying Trump live, Fox would almost always run his events anyway. So he's still going to have that direct connection to the base. And I think that's actually an argument in favor of broadcasting live, interrupting when something truly outrageous happens, fact-checking aggressively. But to ignore his live events, I think, is also risky.
Don't you think on some level he's gotten boring, though? America loves to build people up and tear them down. I mean, with any type of celebrity, at some point, we just get tired of this shtick. And it really does feel like we're just exhausted from it. And it's also not as funny anymore. It's not as interesting. The world has really suffered. And I get a real sense, at least for the, whatever that margin of 10% that you need to turn on the president to elect Joe Biden, that, people see all his moves. It's kind of like when you watch Kellyanne Conway and you understand how she evades questions, right? So someone will ask a question about the pandemic, and then she'll just grab a word and go like, speaking of pandemics, what about the pandemic of violence across the country? And then she doesn't answer the question. I feel like we've all learned what their approach to all this BS is, and we're kind of over it.
It's interesting you said that, because I've heard from a few readers already who said they were surprised when I wrote in the book in the early chapters that Trump is not really a big ratings magnet anymore. But he's not. I've looked at this extensively. He doesn't boost your ratings automatically when he's speaking anymore. It is true that he used to. I mean, there's no denying that in 2015 and 2016, people were hooked on the Trump show and the ratings would spike when he was on air. It doesn't really happen anymore. It happens when he's on Fox sometimes. But if he's giving a press conference, CNN's ratings don't jump up dramatically when he's on the air. MSNBC's ratings sometimes decline when he's speaking. Yeah. So it is true. I think the data backs it up that many people are just tired of it. And I think the Biden campaign is leaning into that. Joe Biden is running a Make America Boring Again campaign that seems to be working.
A question about journalism. Brian, what do you think is the future of journalism? Newspapers are being severely impacted. Their pages are reduced. Their depth is not there. What is the future of journalism?
All of the above. Well, more of everything. And what I mean by that is, I think there is a future for print. It is a diminished future, but there's always going to be some segment of the public that wants to curl up, just like with a book, with a magazine or a newspaper. That's going to be a shrinking group, but I think print will increasingly be a luxury product that'll still exist, but increasingly be supplanted by digital the way it has been. But I say more of everything because we're going to have more outlets. We're going to have more sources, more devices, more apps. It continues to get more confusing to know what to trust. And in that environment where everything's a source and everything's a media company, I'm a media company, you're a media company, because we all have Twitter accounts and we all have Instagram pages. In this environment that's so chaotic, I think we're going to continue to see this return to trusted brands, old school brands that have been around for a while. You know, there's been this rise of what they're called pink slime local news sites. They look like local news sites, but they're really from partisan activists. They're really political operations, but they are disguised to look like local news. And I think in an environment where there's that much trickery and chaos going on, I think it's important to go to the brand that has been there for 20 years. This is what the New York Times is doing so well with digital subscriptions, and it's what the Los Angeles Times is doing as well. I think that's the direction that I see. But I think for young journalists, it's an incredible time to be able to have the ability to reach so many people virtually and digitally. That's what makes me hopeful, is that it's easier than ever to start something new, to start a new brand and start to gain trust, try to gain trust with something new if you're not working at a place that's old and established. The future is more of everything. All of the above, I guess, is the answer.
Final question is actually a two-part question from the same person who says, in the event that the president loses the election, what do you think he will do? Could he be a big talk show host?
I want to hear Judd's answer first, and then I want to read a page of the book that I think has an answer. Judd, what do you think?
I think that a lot of times in our country, people don't want to prosecute someone like Donald Trump because they feel like it creates more division and isn't worth it. I'm certainly of the school that it certainly trains people that they can commit crimes if they watch someone else not be held accountable. And we saw that happen with the big banks after 2008, where people were not held accountable. And I think that he's probably in for a life of legal problems. It seems like the issues having to do with him inflating the value of properties and deflating them to make him more money in each situation is something that he clearly will get prosecuted for and found guilty of, because it's just in the paperwork. If he has a property and he wants a loan, he says it's worth $100 million. If it's for tax purposes, he'll say it's worth $5 million. And I think he did it over and over again for decades. And it's just so clearly against the law that, in addition to all the other things that we talk about, I think, for tax purposes, unless, the state of New York decides, we don't want the trouble of this, he's going to spend the rest of his life in court.
In that scenario, we will still be talking a lot about Donald Trump.
Yes, unfortunately.
President, right? You think about if that is to happen and there is to be a criminal action against him in his post-presidency, we're going to need another court TV channel You know,
Yes.
we're going to do more channels to cover it all.
Well, it all comes out eventually, right? I mean, don't you feel like ultimately every single person around him is going to write a book? A fair amount of them will probably write the tell-all that we'd be surprised. I know there's a Melania book coming out soon that someone wrote about her, who was on the inside. And then the Michael Cohen book comes out in a few weeks. Are you hearing any tidbits from those books that we should know
I am
about?
not yet, but I am glad that Hoax came out before them. That's the way I'll say it.
Your timing was good.
The reason I wanted to pull up the book is that there's a quote toward the end of the book that I think summarizes this whole situation and speaks to what might happen next. It comes from one of Fox's stars. I can't say who, but one of Fox's stars. And they said, Trump is like Fox's Frankenstein. They helped make him, and now he's out of control, and no one knows what'll happen once he's gone. And I think that's true for Fox. I don't think it's clear what, if Trump loses the election and peacefully leaves the White House, will he launch his own television network? Will he try to get a show on some channel? I don't see him going to Fox. I think he would be thinking bigger than that. I think, Trump TV live from Mar-a-Lago would maybe be the idea. And there is some concern about that inside Fox. But more than that, there's really a view that the network is bigger than he is now. And it'll keep humming along with or without him, and it won't matter. So that's going to be a test in 2021 if indeed he's not reelected. But I think the one thing we know for sure is that people will still be talking about Trump no matter what next year.
And our final question is, we haven't heard much about Anonymous, the insider in the administration who wrote that op-ed. Any idea who that may be? And is there any you think it is?
I don't have a good guess, but I am glad that person, even though they were anonymous and there's been a lot of criticism of that choice, I'm still glad the person shared what they shared. I agree with what you just said, Judd. There's going to be so much that comes out. If this is a one-term president, there's going to be so much that comes out, so many books, so many tell-alls. We will probably come away thinking that we did not know the half of it when he was still in office.
I can't imagine how many people took notes of every insane thing he said for the last 4 years. I mean, can you imagine the private conversations on all of these issues, on Russia and Ukraine and the pandemic? I mean, at some point we're going to hear how he thinks and his inability to think clearly. In addition to the corruption, the person that had to explain COVID to him, being frustrated that he doesn't understand how this spreads and where this can go. At some point, all of those people are going to tell us how he resisted doing logical things which could have helped people.
Hey, maybe Sean Hannity will write a tell-all.
He doesn't need to. He owns a lot of rental properties.
That's true too.
I like that when we found out that Michael Cohen had 2 clients, Donald Trump and Sean Hannity. It said a lot. Can I tell people this book was great? I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I can't say I've been able to read a lot during the pandemic due to my level of anxiety. I mean, mainly, what do I read? I don't know. I read books like Why Smart People Hurt. That's what I read. I read, Rewire Your Anxious Brain. I'm not reading that much for pleasure. I'm mainly reading to not lose my sanity, but the book is fantastic to everybody out there. I guess they bought it so they could watch this, but tell people, because it's very helpful to understand how
if you would like to buy another copy, you can go to buyhoax.com.
That's right.
It's the kind of book that I felt like I had to write. There's sometimes you want to write a book and it's just, you just really want to do it. This was more of a need thing. This was more of I need to write this because there's all of these sources at Fox who were spilling their guts out to me. So I was glad I had the chance to do it.
Thanks again, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Brian's book again is Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth. And it is available wherever books are sold. Thank you.